Beacon Press Audio presents Treating Violence by Rob Gore, M.D. This audiobook is narrated by Butler. Published by Beacon Press Audio, 2024. Introduction. Confronting Violence. I've been a physician for over 20 years, and my specialty is emergency medicine. For the past 16 years, I have been practicing at both Kings County Hospital and SUNY Downstate Medical Center in the East Flatbush section of Brooklyn, directly across the street from my old elementary school and a 20 to 30-minute drive from the Fort Greene neighborhood where I grew up. I actually grew up in both Fort Greene and Flatbush. You all will think of the place I work as the ER, for emergency room, but for years now it's been called the ED, for emergency department, in most hospitals. Occasionally, the ED is pretty calm, undramatic. The patients we see present with a wide range of illnesses, diseases, and trauma, both imaginable and unimaginable. Where I practice, the majority of what I see is characteristic of underdeveloped and impoverished communities. The aftermath of systemic racism, the ills of inadequate diets, difficult living conditions, scattered, inconsistent health care for issues like diabetes, asthma, high blood pressure, heart issues, and sometimes just the bumps and bruises of life. And then there are the days, most days, that aren't so quiet. These days are further complicated by shootings, stabbings, rape, other forms of sexual violence, and intimate partner violence, which I see much too often. Usually, the person I'm treating with a fist, knife, or bullet wound is a black man. When I was a younger physician, my patients and I were often the same age, same style, maybe even from the same area. Even now, as an older physician, the patients are sometimes my age and from my neighborhood. The motif is common: a black man losing his life while I am fighting to save it. The cycle is exhausting, and one that needs to end. In 2016, I was privileged to be chosen as an inaugural member of the TED residency program, which ended in 2019 and was an incubator for people to expand ideas or develop new ones. I had applied, never imagining I would be chosen. Over the 14 weeks of the residency, I met amazing thinkers and doers of all kinds. It was especially exhilarating to meet and work with people outside the medical profession. People who were developing ideas about everything from ocean conservation to ending mass incarceration. As part of the residency, we were all invited to give a TED Talk and were coached in how to write and deliver it. I had been doing public speaking regularly since high school, but TED Talks have some different aspects, including standing in front of a camera and speaking to a more global and diverse audience. When it was my turn to speak, I began with this story. I distinctly remember that he was young, black, and he looked like me. He was covered in blood the same as me. But the difference was that he was a patient laid out on a stretcher after being shot in the face and chest, and I was the physician who pronounced him dead. He was killed by another young man that looked like him, who was also being treated for gunshot wounds in the room next door. Coincidentally, the perpetrator had been shot 2 years prior by the dead man. The sad fact is that according to the Centers for Disease Control, homicide, assault, is the number 2 cause of death for black males ages 1 to 9, and the number 1 cause of death for black men ages 15 to 34. This means that we are more likely to die at the hands of another person than from cancer or car accidents. A perfect circle of violence, and one I've committed to disrupting. I do it every day as a doctor. I do it in working with young people through Kings Against Violence Initiative, KAVI, the nonprofit organization I founded that works both to reach young people before they've been victims or perpetrators of violence, and to support victims of violence, as well as heading off retaliatory violence. And now, I'm doing it through this book. I'm hoping to persuade everyone who reads it to join me in the fight to expand the paradigm in the way we approach violence in this country. Despite New York City's significant reductions in crime and violence over the last 30 years, city safety still leaves much to be desired. In 2021, there were over 1,400 shooting incidents in our city. In fact, homicide is a leading cause of death for 15 to 24-year-olds in the city. My home borough of Brooklyn, population 2.7 million, leads the other 4 boroughs in the number of shootings and violent crimes. Although patients come from all over the city and all over the world to be treated where I work, at Kings County Hospital, the majority of patients live in Brooklyn and come from the neighborhoods Flatbush, East Flatbush, Crown Heights, Flatlands, East New York, Canarsie, Bedford-Stuyvesant, also called Bed-Stuy, and Brownsville. The majority of people living in these communities, give or take gentrified members, are black. Black families who migrated from the southern U.S., the Caribbean, and/or Africa. Some of these neighborhoods have some of the highest poverty rates in New York City and in the nation. Brownsville, Crown Heights, and East New York have higher percentages of people living in poverty than the rest of New York City. These neighborhoods, in addition to East Flatbush, also have higher rates of violence and assault-related hospitalizations compared to the rest of the city. The image of violence in the inner city is one that pervades our culture, on TV shows, in movies, and all over social media. It's deep in the popular imagination as well, but the fact is this is real. We live in a violent society. America is at war with itself. Consider these statistics. More than 700,000 youth between the ages of 10 and 24 are treated for non-fatal violent injuries in EDs in U.S. hospitals. People injured due to intentional violence are more likely to die from their injuries than people injured due to an accident. Out of all the homicides committed in the U.S. in 2020, 79% were by firearms. Many people injured due to intentional violence return to the hospital with repeat injuries. Recidivism is as high as 58% within 5 years after the initial injury, and the mortality rate is as high as 20% within 5 years of the initial injury. Some of these intentional acts of violence are related to petty crime, some to vengeance, some to hatred, but the result is the same. Lives cut short, families left bereft, a society eroding at its seams. And how do we react? We lock people up. We look away from the trauma and leave traumatized victims and perpetrators to work it out for themselves. All too often, the cycle begins anew. I am part of a movement with many others all over the country working toward a different way. What if we treated violence like a contagion, a public health threat, one that can be treated in stages? What follows is an excerpt taken from one of CAVI's grant proposals. We believe it's essential to identify trauma first, as a way to get to the root cause of violence and not just the cause of one presenting violent incident. We begin by recognizing and identifying the trauma has occurred. Then we work to determine what is important for those impacted by a violent traumatic event to ensure their short-term and long-term survivability. We are actively seeking to prevent retaliatory violence from occurring and cultivating safe spaces within the community, free from violence. In the immediate aftermath of violence, we are trying to control and prevent more violence. In the long term, the goal is to eradicate interpersonal youth violence. Here's what we hope to do. 1. Create a space where youth know they have alternatives to violence. 2. Be a resource to youth and to community organizations. 3. Create a template for the program that is sustainable and replicable. 4. Decrease violence rates. 5. Decrease incarceration rates. 6. Increase graduation rates. 7. Increase personal and professional opportunities for youth who are most at risk of being subjected to violence or possibly of committing violent acts. In treating disease, illness, trauma, and violence, it is imperative to also seek to understand the cause of these problems, understanding them through a public health lens. The CDC promotes a 4-step process, developed over years through the work of many grassroots, community-based organizations, governmental and non-governmental agencies from around the world, to begin to do that. 1. Define and monitor the problem. 2. Identify risk and protective factors. 3. Develop and test prevention strategies. 4. Assure widespread adoption. I believe this is the only way to effectively transform the impact of violence, and it's why I started CAVI and remains so committed to its mission.
Sample complete. Ready to continue?